those of you who were here last night had the advantage of hearing the full story. I'm going to give you the summary of this story. And those of you who were not here probably even know this story, but maybe haven't heard it in a while. It's called The Gift of the Magi. And it goes something like this. I read the story to the folks last night who were here at Vespers, so they heard it in its entirety. So you're going to get the Brooke summary. This is also an old-fashioned story, so the number that I'm about to give you, you're going to go, how does that work? This is prior to inflation here. This is an old-timey story. So Della is our main character in the story, and Della is at her apartment, her little flat. She's newly married, and she's lamenting on Christmas Eve how she only has $1.87. And she has no way of making quick money, or so she thinks, to get her husband a gift for Christmas. Her husband's name is Jim. Now, Jim is off at work, and Della is thinking, I can't get him something for $1.87. And she's been trying to scrimp and save, and things are just really tight. So an idea eventually comes to her, and she leaves the house, and she goes to the hairdresser, and she sells her hair. Now, no, this is not a real-life story. I know those of you might notice my hair has been chopped off, but this story happened well before I did that, and I had to pay for my hair to be chopped off. Nobody paid me. But she got somebody to buy her hair. So she got $20 from the hairdresser, combined with her $1.87, you can do the math there, and she goes on the town and is looking around for the perfect gift for Jim. And Jim's prized possession is a pocket watch. And it's a pocket watch that he currently has on this leather strap. It's okay, but this is like a prized possession. It's been in the family. His father, his grandfather have passed it down to him, and he loves this pocket watch. And so she scours and finds the perfect chain for this pocket watch, grabs it, takes it home, gets it wrapped up, and eagerly is waiting for Jim to arrive. But as she's waiting, she starts to think, and again, this is a different time frame, she starts to think, what if Jim doesn't like my hair? I've chopped it all off. What am I going to do? So she starts trying to fix it up and make it look nice, and she's just really worried, what's Jim's going to say? I've chopped this all off. She puts the dinner on the table, and Jim, by the way, is a very prompt man. He is prompt for dinner, but Jim is late this evening. And she's sitting there in suspense, waiting for him to come in. She can't wait to give him the gift, but also she's thinking, what's he going to think? And Jim comes in the door, and first thing he does is pause and look at her strangely. Now, he doesn't look at her in horror. He's not looking at her in shock. He's just looking very puzzled. And she can't take it anymore. She goes, Jim, speak to me, say something. Do you still love me? Do you love my hair? Like, Jim. And he's just muttering, stuttering. He can't quite get the words out. And she goes, Jim, it's still me. It's just hair. It's going to grow back. Takes him a few moments to recover himself. And he goes, you might want to sit down. I have a present for you, and you'll understand why I'm muttering and stuttering. Okay, so she sits down, and he hands her this beautifully wrapped present. And she opens it up, and in there is the set of hair combs. Hair combs that she had been wanting for a while, but they were out of their budget, and she thought, I'll never be able to enjoy these. And she's like thrilled, and then she remembers, she has hair, but she doesn't have long hair for these combs right now. Oh, Jim, it's okay, my hair will grow back, I'll be able to wear this eventually. These are lovely. Well, Jim goes, wait, she goes, no, let me show you the present that I got you. So she goes over to the table, everything's gonna be fine. She goes, here, Jim, take this, open it. Jim opens it, pulls out, you know the story, pulls out a golden chain for his pocket watch. He needs to sit down. He says, Della, we're a fine pair. I sold my pocket watch to get you the combs, and you sold your hair to get me a chain for my pocket watch. Now, the end of the story goes something like this, and I'm actually quoting in this case. And this is after O. Henry, who writes the story, says, I'm just relating, this funny little story about these two people who bought these gifts for each other, and it's just maybe inconsequential. But he says this, but in a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that of all who give gifts, these two were the wisest. of all who give and receive gifts, such as they are wisest. Everywhere they are wisest. They are the Magi. So you might be wondering, what does this have to do with, we're talking about couples and healthy relationships? Hopefully as we go along, this will make more sense. Now remember, we've been following some research by Dr. John Gottman that he did on couples, and they made this lovely sound house. We're at the top of the house now. And at this point in the research, and probably you'll notice in your own lives, those of you who are married and in relationships will recognize this, is you get to a point where your house is built on a solid foundation, the relationship's built on a solid foundation. We've talked about this, trust, commitment. You know each other. You're still learning things as you go along. People do change a little bit. You generally like each other most days, most times, all right? Love each other. And you have some ability to kind of manage and go through conflicts. Doesn't mean that you never fight with each other, et cetera, but it means that generally you're going to weather the storms together. So you might think, well, that's it. What else is left to do? If you can do those things, what else is there? Well, the research says, actually, that the couples that are happiest can do all those things and have a spirit of togetherness. In other words, they dream together. That's one of the pieces that you see. They dream together about things. They create shared meaning. They are not just operating as two individuals in a relationship. They're operating more like a unit together and doing things. Again, this doesn't mean that they're doing things all the time together, but it means that they are paying attention and listening to what each other might be interested in and how they can support and help each other. A good example of this, maybe some of you have stories like this in your family background. My grandparents on my mom's side, they were medical folks. My grandpa was a doctor and my grandma was a nurse. As you can imagine, it took longer for my grandpa to be a doctor than it did for my grandma to be a nurse. And in those days, sometimes this doesn't work out for people, but it did for them. They got married kind of, I'm not going to say early on, but he wasn't done with school. So when they got married, in order to help him finish out his dream of becoming a doctor, my grandma worked. So she worked to help support him finish out his school degree. And when he was done, she ended up staying home with the kids and he worked to support them. And so that's just an example, and not everybody does that, and that's not maybe always as feasible, especially in our day and age with the prices of things. But that's just an example you can think of where people together were working on something in a vision, and they took turns to allow each other to be able to do the things that they wanted to do. And the couple that came to my mind when I was thinking about this story in the Bible may not be the couple that you first had in mind, but it is Christmas season, and I thought, somebody who did a lot of stuff together during this that comes to our mind is Mary and Joseph. So I want you to go with me to Luke 2. We're not going to read the entirety of this. I'm going to give you a broad summary because next week you're going to have the opportunity to share and read all the pieces of that. So we're going to skim over and just get a feel for these folks. So Mary and Joseph are the chosen parents for Jesus. And what we see in Luke 2, this is not necessarily the beginning of the story, but this is where we're going to start today. And Luke 2 says this: "In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world." And I'm going to skip over to 3, "and everyone went to their own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, to the town of David, because he belonged to the house and the line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child." So let's stop there just for a moment. There's actually quite a bit of information that's given to us just in these verses. First, we have our main characters, Mary, Joseph, Mary. And we are told that they are, at this point in the story, have to go on a journey. Now, in modern times, to make that trek, that would not be that big of a deal. You'd hop in a car. I've done it. I've been over there. It's not too bad. In ancient times, that is not a hop in the car and go over there. That's on foot. That's on a donkey. That's whatever. And ladies, those of you who have had children can probably relate to Mary. She's very pregnant doing this. So you can imagine, fill in the blanks, how uncomfortable that was likely to be. I don't know, nowadays, at least here in Wrangell, they try to get you out of here well before that so that you can be sitting ready to go. She's very pregnant doing this trip, so it could not have been a comfortable trip. So use your holy imagination just for a second to imagine this. scenario. They have to go on this trip. They are forced to go. There's a decree and they go. And can you imagine Joseph having to tell his very pregnant fiance at this point, honey, we need to make this trip. I don't know how they heard it. So again, using her imagination, we're going to go make this trip. It doesn't say what her response was, although she was human, and perhaps she's like, are you kidding me? In whatever language they would have said that in. And okay, we don't hear anything other than we know that they both end up having to go and make a long, arduous journey. And here's what we also do know, is that they get there. So imagine this again. They get there, they get to the town, she's very pregnant, probably uncomfortable. Who knows how many pit stops they've had to make to even get here. And there's no space. So she doesn't even arrive at a place where she can like put up her feet or whatever. And I imagine that Joseph, since he cares about her, also is like, what am I gonna do with her, right? Like, he probably doesn't even care for himself at that point. He's probably like, what, help my very pregnant fiance here, we've got to be somewhere. And somebody takes pity on them and says, well, you can be in the manger, because as you can imagine, all these people from all over the place are flooding the town. It would be like somebody forcing a census on Wrangell and everybody had to come into town. Where would we put all these people, right? So you can imagine that you would be here sleeping on the top of, the garage carport or whatever you have, something, right, for people to sleep on it. So they finally find a place, and she gives birth in a manger. Now, weather was not what it is here. Probably was not this wet dreariness. I don't know exactly what the weather was. I think they think he was born more like in a springtime. And it's also Middle East, so the temperatures wouldn't have been as bad. We're not talking snow and babies freezing in the manger. If that's the vision that you might have. So they've got to make do with whatever they have. So if she was that close, that was very, very uncomfortable. It also doesn't give us the details that they're going through this together. Who delivered Jesus? If he was born like any other child, who delivered him? Did they go grab the innkeeper's wife? Did they have a midwife in town to come help us out? Was Joseph, who I don't know what the customs were, but I know in some places the men aren't in the space, but did he have to be there because there was nobody else and they delivered together? It doesn't say. What we do know is that Jesus is born. But just imagine that together, that experience that they did together as parents here. And not only that, but if you go over to Matthew 2 with me. Actually, I'm going to stay in Luke 2, but go over to Matthew 2 and get your finger in there. We're also told that shortly thereafter that Jesus is born, that the angels appeared to the shepherds in the field. And they make this big announcement. And the shepherds get up, they go running up. And again, imagine this from Mary and Joseph's perspective. They don't know that this has happened. And this group of ragtag men just show up at your barn. I mean, take that in for a second. Think about that. They've just had this child, and then these men come running in. They're like, we just heard from an angel, and we want to see him for ourselves, and all this kind of stuff. Like, what that must have been like for Mary and Joseph to take that in. And it tells us that Mary, at various points, tells us that she cherishes these things in her heart, right? That she already knew and had been told, just like Joseph at various points have been told, like, this is the Messiah. But here's additional proof, people coming in and saying, oh. So over in Matthew 2, this is later, I don't know how much later. Over in Matthew 2, though, we see men from very far away now arriving, looking very different. They probably don't look very ragtag. They probably actually look relatively more regal. I don't know what they're wearing. But they're arriving in style. And again, they show up wherever Mary and Joseph are. They have no foreknowledge as far as we know that these men are going to show up. And they show up at their house saying, we've followed this star. They've heard the star because they heard the shepherds talk about it. Followed the star to your house because we want to see this child. And by the way, here's some really expensive gifts for what you're doing. I mean, think about that. From the parents' perspective there, you're just minding your own business and these men just show up on your doorstep. And not only that, but backtrack a moment. Remember that they took Jesus to the temple to go dedicate him 8 days after or so. And they go do that, and these two folks come up to them, Simeon and Anna also come up to them and say, wow, this is the Messiah. Like everywhere that they're turning, God is impressing people. This is it. This is what you've been waiting for. I mean, Simeon even says, I can die happy now, basically, because I have now seen what you promised, Lord. And Anna says something somewhat similar, like, what a blessing here. And all this that they took in, again, they're taking this in together. Now, there are several ways that people have envisioned what Mary and Joseph might have went through at this time. And I'm going to share some lyrics with you. I'm not going to sing them to you, but you may know them, and you're welcome if it gets stuck in your head, but this will be in the good way. You might know these lyrics from a couple different songs. And to get us to think about, like, what was this experience like? What might they have thought? They were normal people like you and I. And for Mary, maybe you know these lyrics. Amy Grant sings this song quite well. It's called Breath of Heaven. And it says in the chorus here, imagining her as she's on this journey to Bethlehem, I am waiting in a silent prayer. I am frightened by the load I bear. In a world as cold as stone, must I walk this path alone. Be with me now. Be with me now. Now, again, this is somebody's creative imagination trying to kind of get inside her head and what she might have been thinking. We don't know exactly what she was thinking. But it's not impossible to think that she was worried and frightened. This is also her first child that she's having. And she's walking this path very much maybe feeling alone, but wasn't alone, as we're going to see. And for Joseph, this is actually one of my favorite Christmas songs outside of some of the hymns that we sing. And it's called Strange Way to Save the World. And it goes like this. It says, why me? I'm just a simple man of trade. Why him with all the rulers in the world? Why here inside this stable filled with hay? Why her? She's just an ordinary girl. Now, I'm not one to second guess what angels have to say, but this is such a strange way to save the world. So both of them together were experiencing this miraculous moment, the timing that God had been promising for quite a while, that Jesus would be born, happens in their lifetime, happens in their lives. They are his parents. And I think that we can relate to some of these characteristics that they have. They're a couple. Because here's the thing. They did this together. God gave Jesus parents, a mother and a father. Now, some people might be hearing this, and I know that there are single parents out there, and there's a variety of reasons why people are single parents. But God made for families to have mothers and fathers to do this together. And it was no different for when he sent Jesus into the world. He gave him a mother and a father to work together with him and raise him together. And here were some of the characteristics that we can look at when we look at Mary and Joseph. We don't get a lot about Mary and Joseph, but we do know some pieces, and rightly so. Here's the thing. After these first few chapters, they kind of fade into the background, as they should, because the main character has arrived on the scene. Jesus has arrived. But the Bible gives us these little tidbits to get a sense of who these people were that were helping raise the Son of God. And one of the things we do know is that they were willing to sacrifice for each other. Just like we saw with Della and Jim with the pocket watch and the cones, which is just a little story. But think about that. We don't hear the backstory of what was going on, but we know that after the Magi came to visit, unintentionally they caused this ripple effect. Herod is massively jealous, and they have to leave. And I want you to think about this for a second, that the one who's told initially, Joseph is the one, because he's been having the dreams, right? When he's initially told about, Mary being pregnant, and he's going to quietly divorce her. He doesn't want to cause any problems, but it's not his kid. He knows that much. But the angel tells him, nope, this is the Messiah. You're going to do this, and he accepts that. The angel comes again to him and says, you need to leave in the middle of the night. Again, he has to get up and go tell Mary, who's this new mom, honey, we've got to go, and we need to go now. Together. They leave together, and they leave together to go to a foreign land. Think about that. They're not just leaving to another part of Israel. They have to go actually out of the country into Egypt to fulfill what the scripture said. They're refugees. We don't get much of that story either. But those of you who can imagine or have met people who have done this, moving to another country is not easy. And moving to another country where you don't know the customs, the languages, etc., wouldn't have been as easy in that time frame either for them to do. It doesn't tell us anything about what they do during that time. But they went together. They did it together. And we do know this about them as well, that they are listening to God's voice. They are jointly together listening to God's voice. And I think this is really important, and for those of you who are in church right now with me, or those who are hearing my voice, if you're a Christian and you have that as a foundation in your relationship, I think you have a leg up, if I can say that. I know we don't want to be all like, oh, I'm better than, but you have a leg up if you have that, because you already have a sense of there's something more to this relationship than just you and I. There's God in this relationship. And some ways for us to practically think about, like with Mary and Joseph, we don't get all the background. We don't know how they were supporting each other. We do know that they were doing that because they were doing this together. And we do know also, too, taking us back briefly to the research, too, there's multiple ways that we can take the time to support our spouses and the people around us and help and stream together. And some of them, as I just mentioned earlier, it could be financial support. Maybe you together as a couple decide not only are we going to do tithe, but maybe we're going to do a special offering. Maybe we're going to save back some money. Maybe we want it to get this other thing, but we're going to save together for something else that somebody wants. Or maybe we're going to save together to give to somebody else. That's one way that you can support each other. Maybe hopefully you're providing moral support to each other, right? How is it that when you come back together after a long day, or when you're separated from each other, how do you greet each other when you come back together? Are you, hey, how was your day? What's been going on for you? Taking a few moments, do you give them a hug, do you give them a kiss, what do you do? And also maybe there's logistical support. Maybe you have things that you want to do. We were talking about camping earlier. Maybe you're really into that and you have to think, how do we make this happen? Maybe one of you really loves that. And the other one maybe doesn't love it as much, but they're willing to go and kind of talk about, how do we do that? How do we pack for that? How do we put this together? Let's make this trip. Or maybe you're wanting to go on some vacation, or whatever your goals or dreams or whatever together. Together you can boost each other up on that. Another thing that we know when we talk about this idea of shared meaning is this. Shared meaning means enriching your relationship by creating an inner life together, a culture rich with symbols and rituals, and an appreciation for your roles and goals that link you and that lead you to understand who you are as a couple. In other words, what are the things that you do that makes you unique from different couples? What are the different things, rituals? This is a great time of year to think about that. Everybody celebrates slightly different. Maybe when you got married and you got into the holiday season, maybe there were certain traditions that your families did before you got together that you either had to decide, we can't quite do that way because now we've got two different families to kind of figure out. Or maybe you just started over and said, we're going to do it our way. This is going to be our new tradition, whatever it is. Those types of things bring you closer together and bond you together. But ultimately what they do when we're looking at that top of that house, it's the idea of being together. It's the idea of, when we hear the Bible say being one, that's why earlier I said the couples that do so well don't treat each other as just separate individuals, but they're operating as a unit together. And here's the thing, as we said, in the Christmas story, while we do see Mary and Joseph, and we just talked about them, they fade into the background because someone becomes more important to the story. And it is this. Matthew 1:23. Behold, the virgin shall be with child and shall bring forth a son. They shall call his name Emmanuel, which is, being interpreted, God with us. The story goes forward. The story goes forward to say to us, it no longer is just about Mary and Joseph doing this together, but it's about a greater good, a greater purpose, a greater shared meaning of God with us, God coming to the earth, Christ coming to the earth. You see, because of this, Christ coming to the earth gives us new meaning of the idea of shared meaning among us as believers. He came to be Emmanuel, to be God with us. He came ultimately so that we could be together